All right. And this month on our Healthcare of the Future talk, we have our special guest, a specialist in mental health, and we want to learn about, and she's going to work with us today on learning about the benefits of physical exercise that help different mental health conditions. And Caitlin, I'm gonna let you kind of introduce yourself and give your background, and then we'll let you take it from there and ask questions as we go.
Perfect. So, hi. For those of you that I haven't met through class or through EHP activities, my name is Caitlin Pollstad. My background is I'm a licensed psychologist. So I got my PhD in counseling psychology at the University of North Dakota. A tiny bit of background after that, I worked at the VA in South Dakota for a year or two, came back up to this area, worked at Stanford for a couple of years, kind of doing some inpatient, outpatient stuff. And now I find myself in private practice over in West Fargo and here at my house after the pandemic started. Um, a new thing that I've also done is become certified as a sex therapist. So that's another, and I put a tiny bit of that in here just because that's sort of my area too. But really, I thought today I would focus on depression and anxiety. Those are probably the two most common things I get asked about, and obviously a really common thing in our populations and what people experience the most of. So um, I will say a little bit even about my own story, which is I've been a member of Planet Fitness, Anytime Fitness, a few others that I can't even remember off the top of my head anymore, probably Snap Fitness, something else in there, and I've never stuck with them. Um, but I've always been kind of searching for something to feel good about, something to keep me active. But I always liked signing up for races, things that I could feel accomplished with, but things that I could feel excited about because people around me were also really excited to do it too. So something I have personally really appreciated about joining EHP is that sense of community that I didn't find at my other gyms. And that's not trying to dish on those other places, but I didn't have that same level of social interaction and community where I showed up and people knew my name and said hi to me. And so that is a huge piece of how physical exercise can actually benefit those with depression and anxiety, that piece of social interaction and community that people can experience, especially when things like depression tend to keep us withdrawn and isolative. And we kind of want to just stay away from because we don't feel motivated, we don't have the energy. And if you combine that with people that have social anxiety, that fear of negative evaluation, they're the people that tend to find themselves not in the gym because they're worried, right? They're worried about how's it going to look? How am I doing? What are other people thinking about me? And so, if you have a sense of community that is going to support you at whatever level that you're at, it's a really great way to start to break down some of those barriers. That, again, depression and anxiety, those symptoms tend to want us to withdraw and stay away. Another thing that just the community tends to provide is structure. So be it if you attend a class or if you do open gym, if it's something that you can regularly count on in your day and build that structure and routine in, it's really beneficial to those that do well with that. So folks with ADHD, while they don't necessarily aren't always great at creating that for themselves, that planning and organizing a routine place, if they can get in the habit of it, right? People that can keep them accountable in the way of like saying like, hey, you come into 5 p.m. class and they start to get used to coming every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it starts to be a thing that they count on and can look forward to structure the rest of their evening or their day around. Um, Again, a part of that like social community structure piece is that self-care. Um, Again, part of my own story of coming to EHP was kind of twofold. Definitely the physicality of it. My little guy had broken his leg last summer, and he wasn't able to walk. And so carrying him around everywhere was killing my arm and my back. So I knew I needed to get stronger, because I figured this is probably not the last time we'll have injuries where I'm hauling him around. So I needed that piece of it. But also, I had really struggled with postpartum depression, and mine kind of came out in the way of, a lot more anger than it was sadness. And I needed an outlet for that. And so my goal on joining EHP was, this was going to be my self-care time, where I wasn't mom, I didn't have to be wife, I didn't have to be psychologist to anybody. I just got to go show up for my workout. And because I was trying not to die and learn all these new moves, it was literally the only thing I could focus on. So it was kind of this place where I got to have a bit of mindfulness and have a bit of meditation in that space. So that self-care piece can be really important when we're struggling, even if it's not a diagnosed mental health condition, but when we're struggling and we need to create some time to prioritize ourselves. Exercise can play a huge role for people in that way. Kind of more on the physiological side, what researchers have found is that exercise can actually decrease the impact our stress has on us. So we all have stress. I'd love it if we could eradicate that, but we can't. So what exercise is really shown to do is decrease the number of stress receptors in our brain. So that stress hormone still gets produced because we still have bills and we still have busy schedules and such, but the actual receptors in our brain that are receiving that hormone, that chemical that's our perception of stress, is actually kind of closed off. So we're not perceiving that stress as much as we might have if we weren't exercising. The other feel-good thing, and one of Carla's books that she had shared with me too, was talked a little bit about that runner's high. So that release of endorphins. So those are a lot of our really feel-good chemicals, our dopamine, our serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine. You don't have to remember all of those things, but if you can kind of remember that those are some happy chemicals that get released in our brain when we kind of hit that stride in our workout. And if some of those do sound familiar, dopamine, serotonin, those are typically chemicals that get prescribed to us when we do have depression and anxiety. So a common prescription for an antidepressant is an SSRI. Serotonin basically is what it's boosting in your brain. So you're kind of getting your medication in a different way. That's not to say that SSRIs don't work, but if you're looking for a different route or a different way to complement or bolster your regimen, definitely working out is going to give your body a natural way of doing that. Let's see here. In terms of your brain structure, so exercise has also been shown to increase our focus and our concentration, because what it's doing is actually creating neurogenesis, meaning we are creating new brain cells. When we have, let's say in particular, depression and long-term depression, like it's something we've suffered with for quite a while, it's actually been found that our brain certain structures of our brain, like our amygdala and our hippocampus, can atrophy and shrink. So the hippocampus is, one of its primary functions is memory. And one of the primary functions of the amygdala is emotion regulation. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people with depression, they'll notice those things like, my mood is down, or I feel like I'm having ups and downs and I'm all over the place. And I don't feel like I can remember things. Like people really start to question, like, do I have short-term memory loss? And that's not necessarily true. Or I should say it's true, but not the way of like their brain has decompensated or they're having plaque buildup and protein buildup like we might find in Alzheimer's or dementia. But their brain is not having that as much neurogenesis, and that lack of maybe dopamine that their brain is having is also creating some of that brain fog that makes us feel like we're more forgetful. So again, exercise then promotes promotes that neurogenesis, that kind of turnover in our brain that can be really healthy for us. Along those lines of, other kind of scary words in mental health, Alzheimer's and dementia. Those with longstanding depression do have higher rates of eventually being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia. Where they find that link to be is in some brain inflammation. So the longer we struggle with a mental health condition, especially one that's gone untreated, the more brain inflammation they found. The more brain inflammation that's been there over a longer period of time, the more likely it is that someone develops something like Alzheimer's or dementia. So if we again can decrease that brain inflammation, the idea is we decrease the risk of mental health, we decrease those later neurocognitive functionings that become impaired. So the things like memory in the hippocampus, decision making, which is in our prefrontal cortex, which again, some people that are familiar with Alzheimer's might find that those are sometimes the warning signs when people aren't making the same level of judgments or decisions that they might have made earlier in their life. Let's see here. Sorry, guys, I'm a little bit all over the place, but
I have a quick question, Caitlin.
please.
Do you know if you're doing exercise or keeping brain inflammation down, can you reverse the long-term effects of depression on the hippocampus and amygdala?
Yep, you can. I wish I had, there was a book, of course, that I had in my office today that I was like, because I went to last spring, I went to like a neuro-informed conference and they were talking about that you can reverse those effects of like the brain that's atrophying from long-term depression if you start to do things like exercise, change your diet, and I have this in front of me, which I know you guys won't be able to see, but this just came from Psychology Today, which is a magazine that comes out in psychology that kind of updates us about current research that's going on. And this is talking about the makers of mood. And something I thought really fascinating in here was, this isn't necessarily exercise, but kind of related to that reversing of atrophy in the brain and the inflammation. He was talking about the importance of sleep, physical activity, social life, heart rate, diet. And in this case, it was talking about omega-3 fats. And so it was saying that omega-3 fats are involved in maintaining the brain's balance of neurotransmitters. And it talks about how our Western diet just does not live up to having those omega-3 fats that we need in our brain that can really help create that barrier that holds in all those wonderful chemicals. And so I just found that super fascinating that even in psychology, so while we might be talking about your stress and helping you learn skills, I found more and more of my work asking people about, right, like, are you getting in any movement? What is your diet looking like? Because all of those things, we are having more and more and more and more and more research that just supports that those are affecting our ability to regulate our mood. And I know I've heard Carla talk about the importance of sleep, and I know I've heard her talk about diet, nutrition, and physical activity, and so like all of these points are truthfully really backed up even in Psychology Today. Did I answer your question, Carla?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that was just an important thing for people to know that maybe have been suffering from depression for a long period of time, that like maybe they've lost hope, but there is the possibility that you can reverse it if you take the steps, and the steps aren't necessarily easy. There's a lot of hard work, especially in today's society, but it can be done. And I think that's the cool part that I wanted people to take away. I thought I knew the answer, but I wanted you to reaffirm it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's going to be is maybe a little bit of an offshoot, but thinking about the changing of the brain structure, I think what's going to be really fascinating is, I hope that, and I'm going to assume that they will, is studying those that contracted COVID What preliminary research is showing is that rates of depression and anxiety are higher, and that there's this lingering sense of brain fog. And I mean, I think obviously the stress and depression and anxiety can come from multiple avenues related to that, be it financial, social, losing loved ones. There's a lot of fear during the last few years. And so I think that's going to also influence brain structure. But again, that virus being in your system and how that's affecting brain structure and that sense of fogginess that people are feeling, I think that's probably going to be, another area where we really learn about that interplay between mental health, between that physical body, and what our brain is doing and how that's neurologically impacted.
Cool.
Again, because a newer area of mine is sexual health, I also wanted to throw a little tidbit in there for exercise and sex drive. Another reason why I'm encouraging my patients that I see to be physically active is because a lot of people I see have lower sex drive. And so I'm, again, recommending like, what kind of activity are you getting? Because sex drive has been found to, right, be positively affected by exercise because a couple of things. One, it's going to increase blood flow, right, everywhere, including genitals. So it helps with arousal and functioning. For females in particular, it can help with lubrication. A lot of women, particularly as they age or as they've experienced health conditions like things like cancer, their body has tend to kind of dry out and isn't producing that same hydration. And so exercise has been shown to help with that. And particularly strength training has been shown to increase testosterone, and testosterone is linked to that sexual arousal, sexual desire aspect. So the number one reason I see couples in sex therapy is desire differential. And so that's a big thing that we're typically talking about is getting active so that our body is healthy. And so you have those benefits of that. But then also, and again, linking back to anxiety and depression, is self-esteem, confidence, that body image piece of just feeling good in your skin that you're moving and you're active, and maybe you have some pride in doing something that you couldn't do 6 months ago or a year ago, or feeling good about the way you look, that your clothes feel differently, or that you carry yourself a little straighter. I know, again, for myself, like that's probably been the greatest benefit to me in my self-confidence. It's just like I feel like I'm walking a little bit taller. I feel like, I had a friend talk about CrossFit and she's like, I pretty much feel like a badass at the end of my, I'm like exhausted and whatnot, but she's like, I feel pretty badass at some of the things that I can do. And I kind of like, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like poo-pooed her a little bit. I'm like, okay, sure. But I find that for myself too, just that self-esteem of like, yeah, like I'm doing stuff that I could not do 6 months ago, or even in more athletics before. Like I thought I was really fit and doing things then, but like, oh, if I only would have known this stuff now that I could have used then. So just that sense of confidence. And you guys talk a lot about that functional mobility. So like translating these things into your daily life. And I even think about that confidence of like when my kid launches off the couch, like I know that I can catch him, right? Like I know I have that strength and that ability to do that. And what's really cool for me is seeing him see me as strong, both like mentally and physically. Because when I go to the gym, he's like, "Are you gonna go work out today?" I'm like, "I am." He's like, "Can I come with you?" I'm like, "Not today, dude." But he's starting to see me, a woman, as being really physically and mentally strong. I shared this with a couple of people. We went to the circus a couple weeks ago and it was in town. And there were some performers that were doing kind of like an acrobatic rope event. And they were, climbing up the rope, like no problem at all. And of course, my husband throws a jab and he's like, "That's what you look like, right?" I'm like, "No, it's not what I look like at CrossFit." But my son leaves over and he's like, "They are pretty and really powerful." I'm like, "Yes, they are." So just back to that piece of there's a lot of self-confidence and body image and self-esteem that can come with being physically active in whatever shape that takes. And I love CrossFit for the way of being able to scale and meet people where they're at. And by no means am I a physical health coach or nutritionist or any of those things in my practice, but I can use a lot of motivational interviewing to ask people where they're at, what they've tried, what they might be ready for, why it's important to them. So, yeah, it's important that my primary care doctor wants me to work out 30 minutes, whatever, 3 to 5 times a week. But when I ask them, like, what would actually be meaningful to you about that? And some of the answers I've gotten have been so heartfelt. Um, been working with a gal for now quite a while, but one of her reasons that we were kind of talking about weight loss was, oh, I'm sorry, guys. She wanted to feel better about herself so she could attend family events. You know, she had been avoiding her family because of how she felt about her body size and her mental health. And so even doing things like, I think I sent her like chair yoga videos, and we did some, just like arm raises and stuff on the chair. I mean, because that was where she was at. It did such a wonder for her self-esteem and to kind of combat some of that depression and some of that anxiety so that she could start doing more meaningful things in her life. So, yes, it was great for her physical health, and that was wonderful. But it was really the mental health component that was preventing her from being more involved in her life. So I think I blew through everything I was going to talk through. So I would be more interested in if people had questions or comments or stories that they would want to share.
I have a question about, I know we hit a lot on depression. So what would be some like guidance, not like you're not like counseling anybody via here, but what if people suffered from a lot of social anxiety? If they were contemplating joining a facility like this or really anything else, like what kind of insight could you maybe help to give them to like allow them to like possibly take that next step?
That's a really good idea. So I'm gonna treat it like a hypothetical patient anyways. With social anxiety, one of the best ways we have for treating that is using what's called exposure and response prevention, which is also something we kind of use to treat things like obsessive compulsive disorder. But it's basically, you create kind of this hierarchy of a thing that scares you. So in this case, it'd be a social community sort of thing, becoming a part of a gym. So if that's like your 100 out of 100, like going to a full workout class is like the scariest thing you could ask me to do, we would help you break it down to be like, okay, what would be a level 50 out of 100? Would it be going to the gym? Would it be sitting in the parking lot? Would it be meeting one-on-one with a coach? Would it be having kind of a mentor, somebody that can show up and meet you and know your name and kind of introduce you to people and show you the movements? So we would kind of create this scale with you. And then the really, really scary part, right, is then it starts to be doing some of the exposure experiments. So you take your lowest level thing. If you're like, I'm going to do a drive-by of, the gym, and I'm just going to look at it really quick. Okay, keep doing that, right, until we would tell you until your anxiety cuts by half. So if driving by the gym, you're like, that's an 8 out of 10 anxiety for me. Okay, keep driving by until doing that becomes a 4. And then maybe you move up to your next thing of, okay, I could be in the parking lot. Do that till your anxiety cuts in half. I could go into the lobby. Okay, I could email a coach. I could meet with a coach. I think, again, that's one of the things that I really appreciated about EHP was there were so many, again, social pieces that made it feel more comfortable, whether that was knowing I was going to have a coach that knew my name, getting an introduction to the movements, assessing my level. So I wasn't afraid that I was going to hurt myself as badly, because I had somebody telling me like, okay, this is kind of where your level is at. Having a mentor. So having somebody like Karen, who, met me the first time I showed up to a class and said, hey, and was a friendly face that I could look for. I think something too I've given you feedback on, Carla, is just even the flags, like having the flags in the gym to say like this is an inclusive place. Like for members of these types of communities, be it military, LGBTQ, like people are welcome here.
Mhm.
And I think that was another thing too that just kind of hit home and reduced any of that, some of that social anxiety that might be present. So I think if somebody can kind of identify what are some, they can kind of create this range of here's the steps to the really scary thing. And if I can conquer one of those steps at a time, that's kind of a great way to ease yourself into feeling more like a regular.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. I know. I mean, we've also had people reach out with severe social anxiety, so that's probably a piece that we can be more aware of when working with them on what's the next step to joining. And maybe if it is that social anxiety, we can use is meeting one-on-one with a coach. Like, how about we try 6 times? Where does that bring you? So those are really good things for us. So thank you about that.
Yeah.
Does anybody listening have any questions? Give them a moment here. Um, if you're listening and you have questions, just keep them for a moment. Um, I want to touch on something that you talked about, and this sort of when we met a while ago, just in person, just be like, how can we do better? You mentioned that your hour here is so good for like the mindfulness and the meditation. And I had never thought of it that way because I think of meditation being in a quiet,
Mhm.
relaxed state with like breathing. And so I want you to touch a little bit about how this seemingly high intensity workout is actually a way of mindfulness and meditation that might be really what people need, but they just like they're like, I don't want to meditate because I don't like stillness and I don't like that.
Yeah, no, I have so many anxiety patients that are like getting me to sit still, and ADHD too, like getting me to sit still to do like this Zen peaceful thing is not going to happen. And so when it's nice out, and people are up for it, I actually take people, we walk around the block of our building, um, because then I practice meditation with them to say like, use your five senses. What are you hearing? What are you smelling? What are you seeing? What are you feeling under your feet? Because meditation can be an active thing. It doesn't have to be this passive, my brain is silent and shut off, because that's impossible. It's kind of harnessing that power of concentration to kind of quiet all those racing thoughts. And so, like I said, when I come for my hour, it feels like that for me because I cannot focus on any of the other stuff, like what my patient load day has been like, what I've got to do for supper right as soon as I get home, because I'm literally trying to focus on how's my body moving. So being really aware of my body and the lift or the thing I'm trying to learn and focus on. So I'm intentionally practicing that focus. And those thoughts do wander, and that's the thing about mindfulness and meditation. It is a practice. So I have a lot of people that'll come back after trying it once or twice, they're like, it didn't work for me. Like, yeah, of course it didn't, because it's not something you master in a practice or two. It's kind of like learning a sport or an instrument. It takes some time to kind of harness those wandering, racing, distracting thoughts and coming back to the really present moment. And I think another piece of that, so if you're not familiar with mindfulness, a couple tenets of that is being in the present. So very here and now, what's in this moment, and in a non-judgmental way. Those two things are super hard for most people to practice because a lot of our culture and society doesn't promote that. We are multitaskers doing a million things. We have a million roles in our lives and are pulled in so many directions that being present and non-judgmental is really hard. Um, and so even again, coming to the gym and seeing people of all varying levels, there's definitely moments where I'm judging myself and being like, why can't I do toes to bar yet? Why can't I do a pull up yet? And having to practice, retraining my brain and coming back to the here and now. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm focusing on. Whatever they're doing in the station next to me, that's their own journey and their own thing. And I don't have to compare to them. And so to me, coming for my workout very much is a practice of mindfulness, of non-judgmental, here and now. Can I bring my brain back over and over and over?
Yeah, and it's really like getting over the self-judgment.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times, like, people have fear that others might be judging them, but it's really more about like, how am I judging myself? Because I sometimes think we are our own worst critics to a
Yeah.
fault. And that can be literally one of the biggest roadblocks that I see, from athletes and from patients. But you're your own worst enemy.
And when
Um,
you do struggle with depression or anxiety, you're like a master of that. Like your brain is in your head all day long, comparing yourself, telling yourself usually pretty nasty messages of things like, I'm not enough, I'm a failure, I'm not, like, and so our brain has this well-worn path of this message that we've told ourselves over and over and over. And
yeah,
so actively challenging that is super hard.
awesome. Does anybody have any last questions?
So chat question. I'm just
Yeah.
going to read it out loud, Amy. If you struggle with anxiety and depression and you fall off going to the gym, how do you help that person just stay consistent? I do it for a while, especially outside of winter, but then life happens and I almost self-destruct with unhealthy eating and not working out. I know it's good for me, but can't get over that. Yes, Carla, self-destructive. Oh, that is such a tough question. On a personal level, I absolutely struggle with that. Um, I once had a graduate professor say that anybody in that room that she was speaking to was all some level of OCPD, which is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. You have some level of perfectionism. You are type A people, you're overachievers. And so I battle that quite a bit in my brain. So like in my head, I know things aren't going to be linear. Like I'm not going to like make it to the gym, even 3, 4 times a week, every week. And that like the weight and the body is all going to stay the same. And so when I fall off, I start to like beat myself up. And it just gets easier and easier to convince myself not to go back because it's gonna be really hard and that I can just eat what I want and somehow that's not going to have consequences even though I know it will. So when I have clients that are struggling with that anxiety and depression and they kind of fall out of their rhythm that they've been in, we work really hard at challenging those thoughts that they've somehow failed, right? Because their first thing is that they're going to judge themselves that like I fell off the wagon sort of thing, like I'm not on track with what I was doing. Um, and so in a sense, we kind of talk about like that's a part of the process. So I think we try to spend time just normalizing like it isn't always going to be this linear process, and what really is going to make the difference, be it working out, addressing your excuse me, addressing your depression or your anxiety, is how soon do you notice that you've kind of fallen away from your goal? How quickly can you recover by getting back in? Um, and that's and again just that like mindfulness of like challenging the judgment that it's not going to be the same as even 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 3 months ago, whatever the thing was that you fell away from. But it's a lot of that cognitive challenging what your brain wants to tell you, that negative message about it. Sometimes I have folks practice diffusion, which is a way of kind of separating yourself from your thoughts. So I have people do like a little guided imagery in my office where you picture sitting by a beautiful stream, and whatever thought, judgment pops up, you write that thought on a leaf, you put the leaf on the water, and you watch it go by. So it's not necessarily challenging it anymore to say, I'm not a failure because, I was consistently working out and I know that I've done it in the past and I can do it again. And you can do that route. That route is fine if it's working for you. If it's not working for you, try to just separate from the thought to go like, this is a rough draft. So when I write a rough draft of a paper, it's usually garbage and it requires some editing. And our thoughts are the same way. The first thing that pops up does not mean it's accurate or truthful. It is just a thought that shows up. Take some time to separate from it, see if you can let it go. And then if all of the cognitive work isn't helping, try somebody helping you that's encouraging you of like, hey, do you want to go to the gym with me? Or we could just go for a walk tonight, or we can meal prep together, see if you can have that social support of getting back on track. And then always a go-to is some of that emotional self-soothing. Again, you don't have to berating yourself, despite what people think. People think criticizing themselves and berating themselves, the thing that motivates them, it absolutely does the opposite. It makes us stay home and eat the bag of Doritos, and like it does not get us to the gym as much as people think it does. Usually it tears at our self-esteem. So doing some of that self-soothing emotional work of, okay, so I'm feeling disappointed and that's where I'm at. And so if I don't want to feel disappointed, I want to feel something other than that, the opposite of that. Maybe that's proud of yourself. Think of a behavior and activity that gets you closer to that feeling and further away from that disappointment.
Yeah, I think something that we've implemented with our athletes and their like 90-day coaches is how accountable from a scale of 0 to 10 do you want me to hold you to your goals?
Mm-hmm.
And there are different seasons in everybody's life. And this has allowed us to gauge, I guess, every 90 days at least, but like, how much do you want that coach to be on you? And if you're maybe like really struggling, you're like, I need you to be really on me because like, on you as in like, hey, I saw that you were here once last week and your goal is 3 times or whatever it is. And being a person that struggles from perfectionism myself, this has been a really interesting thing to learn, but because you want to do things so right and so well, procrastination is like a disguised form of perfectionism. And so if you get out of a routine and you are so worried that you're not going to be perfect or like you want to be, you procrastinate it more and more and more. And so if you can be aware that you're using procrastination because you really want to be perfect, it's kind of, it's just a very eye-opening experience of like, I just got to start. Like, I just got to like put one foot in front of the other and just go. And I think that's just something too, where Amy said, like, be mindful of it. That's the first step. Like, okay, you see it's happening, but you can always reach out as well if you need help with that. Cool.
I think one of the things that I just noticed for myself is, so there's the thruster challenge right now, and there's, comments of like, what's the most creative thing that you can do it with, right? That's sometimes a challenge for me in the summer when we're busy camping and I'm like, oh, I didn't get in there as much as I thought I was going to, is I try to take that creativity of like, this stuff does apply to outside of a gym. I don't need a bunch of weights. I don't have to have them. I can be doing stuff as we're out at the campground that like is still movement and still good. And that stuff I know for me really buffers that kind of self-judgment of like, oh, I haven't gotten there this week as much as I wanted.
It's better to move well and move often than to move perfectly seldomly. Awesome. Well, we did run a little bit over, but I know, Caitlin, you are feeling under the weather today, so thank you for joining us from home. And this will be posted on our blog and also our Facebook page coming up in the upcoming weeks. But I just really wanted to thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And we really appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.